Hi there, and welcome to this special edition of Campus Talks, brought to you by Times Higher Education in partnership with the University of Florida. I'm Miranda Prynne, campus editor, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Alain Pompilus, who is Associate Vice President of Constituent Knowledge, Research and Insights at the University of Florida. And we will be discussing a project that Alain has driven at the institution to really turbocharge its understanding of key interest groups. So that's students, prospective students, their parents, and alumni, so that the institution can adapt the way it communicates with and serves these groups to really effectively meet their needs. Alain, great to have you on Campus Talks and to have the University of Florida among our Campus Plus partners.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Miranda.
So you joined the University of Florida in July 2024. That's nearly 2 years ago now. And you came from a private sector background, having worked at educational book publisher Scholastic. What were you actually brought into the University of Florida to do? What was the brief?
So I was brought into the university to help them with a more coordinated enterprise approach to supporting constituent insights, their market research, and definitely analytics as well. So what that means is that I'm helping them build a mechanism that leverages existing data, but also finds new ways to listen to our constituents. The goal there is to understand the values, expectations, those real moments that matter among the different audiences that we serve. And that includes prospective students, as you mentioned, current students, alumni, employees, and really use that to use that understanding to help improve their experience in a meaningful way.
Fantastic. So yeah, essentially the university wanted a more effective mechanism for collecting and collating insights on these different groups. You refer to them as constituents, but as you say, this is current students, prospective students, alumni, and so on. What were the initial steps to making this happen? You've mentioned using existing data, but was it also about kind of increasing the amount of data collected, ensuring the right tools were in place, training and so on? Can you talk us through how you actually sort of start this process?
Absolutely. So we essentially took there were three initial key steps. Right just before I came to the university leadership engaged with a global research firm, a global brand and market research firm to engage in a more comprehensive perception study of our audiences. And really that was incredibly valuable because what we were able to do is get sort of this third party independent researcher to help us understand how our constituents perceived us. And we also did a comparison of perceptions of other constituents of other institutions and how they perceive them. So it really provided this really wonderful comparative study on where perceptions are today. And what that study initially did was provide us a North Star on where we need to go and also provide a launching pad for us to launch our enterprise insights operation. And that was really the first step. The second step was taking the study itself and socializing it across the university, what I call a listening and sharing tour. And what I did was take that information to our university leadership and say, how does this information impact the students that you're serving? What insights are surprising to you? What is confirmatory? What are some things that you would like to understand? And really, it helped me with that initial process of trying to understand what are the insights that they need to serve to enhance their roles and their operations. So it really initiated that, provided a forum for that exchange of information and ideas. And the third step we did was taking that feedback, both the feedback we received from the research study, looking at the feedback that we received from all the other leaders, and crafting what I call just a university or insights roadmap for the university. And that was a combination of my experience using CRM models, using published research at that. And what we decided to do is craft the roadmap into four essential phases. The first phase is establishing culture, where you're hiring the right people, you're investing in the right tools, assessing what research tools work best for the institution. Second phase is collecting and transforming data and looking at what information flows are happening in different areas, what information that we need to transform, the data that we need to transform. Then the phase three is sort of creating segmentation and constituent portfolios, personas, maybe people are more familiar with. And then lastly, measuring and monitoring performance. So we're sort of in that early phase one and phase two of that roadmap.
Okay, brilliant. And then to break that down a bit, to start with, I'm very interested in what this initial survey that you had carried out by a third party, what that showed you. Were there any key findings that really stand out about what the perceptions of the university were, and I suppose what the action points almost off the back of it? Like, was there anything in particular that really needed addressing? Were there any real strong points that you could celebrate?
Yeah, the research study really confirmed that our audience perceptions are extremely high at the University of Florida. Highly recognizable brand, world-class education, leadership in the state and across the country. So we were able to get that feedback back to us, and really that was confirmatory, but where we saw opportunity, and I think this is definitely a reflection of where market forces are going for higher insight for higher ed, but we had an opportunity to increase our relevance for our audience. And particularly what that means is making sure that we have more of that connection through care, empathy. We, I believe Yale recently released that a research study that indicated that trust is deteriorating over time. And what we're trying to do is essentially monitor that over time and also reverse that trend that's happening broadly for education. So what does that mean is that we need to do a better job personalizing the education experience, connecting the full student journey. We realized through the research that roughly 60% of emotional attribution actually has higher impact for prospective students versus functional attributions. And so those are those reinforcing data points that tell us we need to just connect more.
Yeah, so where you talk about emotional attributes over was it factual attributes? So
Yes.
functionals, does that refer to information that really appeals to the emotions rather than just trying to use kind of hard fact evidence to win people over? Is that the difference?
Yeah, so they're all important. I should probably say that they're all important, but when it comes to impacting some of those outcomes for consideration or application or enrollment, it's really that personalized spark. What is it about the particular institution to that specific person that makes them excited, that makes them gives them that emotional feeling? You need to be a leader in research. You need to have up-to-date facilities, and those are the things that I'm speaking about in terms of the functional. But what are we doing to make you feel, how to increase your feeling and your trust in those emotional connections? And so those are just as important. And so what we're doing with that information today is essentially reviewing our messaging and our communication so that we're incorporating more of that emotional attribution because it does have statistically higher impact.
Yeah, appeal to people's hearts as well as their heads.
Yes.
We are emotional beings, so it makes sense. And then coming back to the four-stage roadmap, now you've mentioned that you're kind of in those first two steps, which is culture, looking at the people that the talent, the expertise that you've got in-house, perhaps I guess what you might need, and similarly what tools are available, what tools you might need, and then moving on to the data and what information flows are already happening, what information flows you might want to build. I just wonder what was already available. I mean, what have you found in terms of, yeah, the information that you've already got? Like, is there sort of enough there, or is there quite a lot of work to do to actually start building new insights in areas where so far you just don't have the data?
Yeah, I think one, the culture, fortunately for me, was present, like in terms of wanting to be a data driven university, wanting to use information, just the natural curiosity of how the university leaders want to serve their students. All of that was very present, so that part was easy. But also part of what we're trying to build here is a mechanism that builds long-term affinity and trust, and so that requires an investment in not just tools and systems, but also culture and process. And so part of that is what I'm working on now. And part of that is having the conversation with the university leaders, having understanding what insights would help their operation. And what I realized also too is that a lot of the insights that we were creating was also being done at the functional level. So there is very much a two-way process in terms of understanding insights and sharing insights. And the goal, what I begin to recognize is that it's really about connecting the insights across the different functions, not so much at this point right now is generating new insights but really just tapping into what they already have. So it's sharing something that may have come out of student life with the top of the funnel, which is an enrollment, or taking that information with enrollment and student and sharing with alumni and having those conversations is what I'm finding.
Yes, and I have to say, I hear that echoed across a lot of institutions that we speak to. If you talk to universities about data, data management, whether it's student data or other data, most of them say we have huge amounts of data. It's actually joining up those systems, ensuring that the right data reaches the right people who might be able to use it really effectively. That's where the challenge lies in these huge devolved organizations with, many hundreds, thousands of people involved.
I just want to add to that, like what's interesting about that is that the student perceives, like when they're reflecting back at the end of that journey, or when they're in their career, they reflect on the entire journey. And so from the student perspective, it's one connected journey. And so our data isn't reflecting that. And so if the information is not flowing through, if we're not being actioning in the right points in those moments that matters, like we're missing those opportunities. So but unfortunately, we have leadership that understands that and are enthusiastic about bridging that gap.
Yes, and it sounds like it's very much a two-way channel between yourself and the insights you're generating, like the findings of that initial survey, for instance, and what it highlighted. And therefore you informing the leadership, but also the leadership informing you what they need to know and what perhaps, as you say, surprises them and so on. It sounds like there's a nice kind of two-way flow there. We've touched, perhaps alluded to some of the challenges of doing this, but your previous experience of building an enterprise insights function was, of course, for Scholastic, a private company. So I wondered what unexpected barriers or challenges you have encountered when trying to do the same thing in a higher education setting, and perhaps how you've started to try and address these.
I would definitely have to say it's the level of decentralization. As you know, when I worked at Scholastic, I built an insight function that was highly centralized. It served as the center of excellence for the entire organization. It was deeply integrated into how decisions were made from product development, sales, philanthropy, marketing. We showed up in terms of how do we best serve the child? How do we best serve the guardians, the parents, the teachers and administrators? And so our leadership at Scholastic in the private sector was really in tune with using data and insights to make those decisions. And so the difference here in higher education, you have that level of where I centered in the private sector, we were the center of excellence and we put all expertise in one place. In higher education, it's all decentralized. It's in the functions, it's in the units, and highly intelligent, highly competent people. So the challenge again is more about connecting. It's not a lack of insight, but it's really about connecting those insights to create that more coordinated approach, leveraging the competency that exists and increasing the capabilities for everyone. As expertise is distributed all different places. Not everyone has the tools that certain units may other have, the other units may have, and so part of that process is to bring that all together.
Yes, and that kind of brings me on to one of the other questions I was going to ask, which is really on that exact point that one of the major challenges with any transformative university project is getting so many disparate teams and departments who need to be involved. So, based on your work so far, what is your advice on how to get buy-in for an initiative across an institution? I'm interested to know how you are trying to join it up and make these links.
Yeah, so my approach typically is to work directly with leaders. I'm very big on forming relationships. And so one of the things that I did was essentially build out case studies with all individual leaders, use cases, I should say, that would help their function. We built out simple ROI models as my nexus of being a business person and in academia. So that was very important, both to demonstrate to leadership and prove that operational and operational efficiency and cost effectiveness. So we built out models tied to both university metrics and higher education metrics. So that conversation is critical in demonstrating the value that we have as an enterprise institution, but also elevating the work that they're doing in the individual units. So it's an ongoing conversation. Use cases change, initiatives change, and questions change, but we're making sure like we're benchmarking to providing measured outcomes essentially.
Yeah. And when you talk about working with leaders and building those relationships, so presumably that's departmental leaders across the board, and then it's sort of their job to implement things within those departments. So there's a filter down approach. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that's so I've it's been said that I've been able to call the Avengers together. So I've had the conversations with enrollment and the chief enrollment officer and leaders of student life. We were talking to the finance CFO. We're talking to board of trustees. We're having conversations all around about this vision and this goal, and how is it that insights and data can support the operation and support the students that you're trying to reach. And one thing that has just been very well received is that the realization that we can go deeper in a more cost-effective way to understand the student has been largely received, in a very positive way. And so, they're understanding that this information can help with retention, that they can help with student success, that they can help build that long-term affinity over time as students start at the top of the funnel and then end up in the career phase. All of that, they are able to recognize the value of doing that.
Yeah. So part of it is communicating actually what's in it for everyone, in the sense of whatever department you speak to probably has something to gain by engaging in this work, and clearly communicating that to them presumably really helps with the incentives for getting people to invest their time and energy in supporting it. Can you perhaps taking an example, because this is huge, huge and varied piece of work with loads of different branches to it, but could you give us an example of how, in a particular context, the process works? Like, how are the insights generated, who by, and how is that information then distributed and used?
So today, the insights are generated from a mix of existing efforts across the university. So there's questions and initiatives that come from the top down, posed by our, senior leadership. And then there's research, there's essentially targeted projects that I'm also finding within the units and functions. So my role so far has been about providing that structure, establishing a more consistent way of sharing insights, more consistent way of collecting insights. And we have used those relationships and those communication channels to socialize them, whether it's an insight that's coming from, as I said, current students and sharing that with enrollment and vice versa, or alumni. Part of that communication channel is what makes the process work right now. But ultimately, at some point, our roadmap calls for developing dashboards so that we can empower our university leaders to explore information for themselves.
Okay, yeah, I see. So you'll create a system whereby people can draw on data coming in through different channels that might be useful to them. I realize it is at a very early stage, so this might be a tricky question, but can you give any examples of how new insights and understanding of, for example, current students or prospective students has been translated into practical actions across the university marketing effort?
Yeah, so we're using those insights to check whether our communication and messaging have those elements of empathy, caring, connection. It's that review process, that integration process. We're having that's part of where I'm seeing the insights begin to filter through. We have research where we're going to have focus groups and qualitative research to figure out, how can we show up in a more empathetic way? How do we communicate and maybe change around language in this article so that it resonates with you? Part of that process is definitely happening in the marketing functions and then marketing collaborators in the different units as well.
Okay, and where you talk about focus groups, presumably that group's involving, for instance, the students or a set of students to feed back and give that kind of first person experience of what works for them and what doesn't.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. And what is your advice for establishing effective governance and communication channels in initiatives like this, just to ensure that the work doesn't stall? Because again, I see that that's always a risk if there's only sort of one person leading in something and then perhaps they move on, then what happens to that project? I'm intrigued as to how you're sort of managing that to ensure that this is ongoing and keeps progressing.
Yeah, I keep emphasizing that we're building an infrastructure that you all have access to, and that is collaborate or it's collaborative. So they're used to that information. They're used to the shared governance aspect of higher education. And my role is to make sure that you have and empowered with the information that you need. And then maybe my role also is about triggering that question, like, do we have that information? Has that question already been answered? And so, my role that continues to evolve just really is about providing that infrastructure to our leaders.
And what would you say has been the impact of your work at the University of Florida so far?
I would say the most notable impact so far has been in how the university is thinking about its audiences and the realization that the mechanisms that we're building are allowing us to go deeper in a more cost effective. And it's wonderful seeing that. I'm seeing that there's a growing emphasis in how we're listening to signals that already exist across the institution, how they're using that to better understand what matters most to our various audiences and constituencies. I see a shift in that equity, that brand equity of relevance, and just the conversation happening and matriculating into team meetings, into conversations, and it's really wonderful. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah, and would you say it's felt generally across the University of Florida, but also possibly just US higher education more broadly, that a really concerted effort to really understand what various key target groups want, need, and so on has become more pertinent in an age where higher education is losing public faith in some areas, isn't kind of able to take students for granted in the way that perhaps in the past they may have done. Do you think that is part of the driver here that's really making this vital for universities to focus on properly serving their audiences with proper insights?
Yeah, I absolutely see that, as evidenced by the Yale study and what we're seeing here at the University of Florida. The Yale study essentially identified that some of the trust is due to the cost of education, ideological positions, and essentially being disconnected from the community. And so what I appreciate about this role is required a great deal of foresight. And so how do we measure that trust over time? Can we create interventions to help, show up a little bit more differently and consistently with our communities? The University of Florida in the US, Florida is a flagship university. The state of Florida is ranked #1 in higher education. So cost is not an issue for us, but we can be more consistent in terms of showing up for our students in a more connected way. If you think about, again, more of those market forces that you're referring to, personalization is everywhere. And so the technologies are there for us to understand and listen to those signals. And all we have to do is work on strategies in order to show up and execute on that.
Well, Alan, it's been great to hear about this initiative and the lessons that you can offer from it, which I'm sure will be of use to many other institutions. So thank you so much for joining me on Campus Talks today.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do like, share, and subscribe. And you can find many other episodes of Campus Talks featuring experts from universities all over the world sharing their insights on a vast range of topics at timeshighereducation.com/campus/podcasts. Thanks for listening. We will be back with you next week. Bye bye.